springs up from the Mahatma, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Purport by His Divine Grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence. And this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there is a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Mm-hmm. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there's always the chance that this will happen. And therefore, one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind. And from this material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Well, everything in this verse is about consciousness, how it comes about, how it becomes contaminated, and how it can become purified. So when consciousness is contaminated, it develops a false ego. So let's go over this one more time. The verse says, the material ego springs from the Mahatma, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Okay, so the genesis of the mind is coming from uh, the three types of material ego. Okay, so it says it is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, and the organs of action and the gross elements evolve. Okay, so it's not just the mind, but it's all these four things. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprung up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as self. This can happen very early in life. After a child is born, he naturally identifies himself with the body. And it can continue all through life unless the living entity comes in contact with Krishna consciousness and begins to understand what is the reality of his or her position in the material world. So it says here, in the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. So originally, we are all Krishna conscious. But because of limited free will and lack of proper education, we gradually develop the false ego, or false ego means identification with the body as the self. The living entity exists in the natural state, Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence. In other words, limited independence. And this allows him to forget Krishna. So as soon as we're born, we can either identify ourselves as coming from Krishna, or identify ourselves as coming from material nature. And our parents help us identify with material nature. Our school teachers help us by identifying with material nature. Our relatives help us by identifying with material nature. Books help us identifying with material nature. Relatives help us by identifying with material nature. So, and it happens early on when a child is born, and the parents and the relatives are cuddling the child and giving it a name, giving the child a name, and kissing the child, and so forth. The child develops its false ego. Okay, but in the womb of the mother, the child was praying to Krishna, please help me get out of this terrible situation. I'm in a very difficult posture in this womb. My body is being eaten by bugs or different other living entities in the womb of my mother. And I, I want to get out of this difficult situation. Yeah, the child in the womb is in a very difficult situation. At first, in the beginning, it is so, let's say, just developing its consciousness. It doesn't feel so much pain, but as it gets bigger and bigger, it begins to feel a lot of pain in the womb of the mother. Okay, and begins to pray, please, Krishna, get me out of this situation. When I get out, I will always be your devotee. But because of the trauma of birth, uh, all these things are forgotten. And the way the mother and father deal with the child becomes completely not only forgetful of Krishna, but identifying completely with the body. So it says, in the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence. And this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there's a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness subtly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. That's a very major statement. Factually, there's always the chance that this will happen. And therefore, one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from this material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. Well, this is happening to everyone in a very subtle way. So without hearing these purports by Srila Prabhupada, we can easily go on this path of forgetfulness of our relationship with Krishna and be completely under the control of Maya for a whole lifetime. It's only in the last moments we realize we made a mistake, but then it's too late to rectify ourselves. So it's all about the development of this false ego. And the false ego arises from pure consciousness. And Prabhupada says here, factually, there's always the chance that this will happen. And therefore, one has to be very careful. Well, most kids today are not very careful. False ego is the basic principle of all material activities which are executed in the modes of material nature. Well, let's stop right there. I've always asked the question to some of our parents and also our kids. What's wrong with your child to become a pure devotee and spread one's life in spreading Krishna consciousness instead of becoming a professional person, working in a company, making money, well, getting married, getting a nice house, all these things. What's wrong with the child being trained to become a devotee for the rest of his life? I knew this one lady. She's a very nice lady, and I knew her husband, but her husband died. He was bitten by a snake, and he died. And then I have to. I volunteered to help her financially uh, after her husband died. I knew the husband really well, and she had one son, and I helped the son also financially for some time. And he grew up to be a devotee. And instead of getting a job, instead of getting married, he became a brahmachari. And he's still a brahmachari. He now is, maybe 35, 40 years old. He never wanted to get married. And he lives in the ashram. He goes on Sankirtan every day and so forth. That was a very interesting, model where his father died very early on when he was still a child. Uh, and then his wife was left without any, let's say, means. But, I helped her for some years, and then her family kicked in, and she was able to raise her son, who became a devotee and never got married, and has always been a devotee, going on Sankirtan, chanting Hare Krishna, and so forth. It's very interesting. He was not interested at all of, uh, becoming, getting a job and getting married or whatever. And he's still a devotee, and he's still uh, a good example of a boy who uh, grew up but had no desire to become materially involved. He always he's always been engaged in Krishna conscious activities, and without the desire of getting married, etc. So uh, the uh, the possibility of dedicating one's life completely to Krishna consciousness is always there, and one may not be educated professionally in college and so forth, but one is educated in Krishna consciousness, and one becomes a preacher and involved in Sankirtan, and it's something that can be done from early childhood right through your lifetime. So that's the example of this one boy that I know. He's not a boy anymore. He's an adult, and he decided not to get married, and he decided to remain a brahmachari the rest of his life. So, is that an exceptional person? Yes, you would say that's an exceptional person. And he was not forced to do any of those things. It was just natural for him to become a brahmachari, live in the ashram, go on Sankirtan, preach, and so forth. So therefore, it says here, not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. Very big statement, very wonderful statement. This falls down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. Yeah, at any moment, we have two choices. Choice one, I want to become Krishna conscious. Choice two, I don't want to become Krishna conscious. So at any moment, I have these two choices. And it's not that we decide once and it goes forever. No, we have to keep deciding every moment to be either Krishna conscious or to not be Krishna conscious. That's why it says that one must be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. And I've seen this, in practice. I was living at one time with a priest, and he was teaching me the Bible. And he was not just an ordinary priest; he was actually an archbishop. So he was, a more advanced priest. And but he had some bad habits. I didn't notice them at first, and but as time went on, it got worse and worse, and he fell down. Then he got married. Then he started a business, and so forth. He had some children. In other words, he stopped being a priest. Why? Because of his inattentiveness to his priesthood and his vows that he took. He was not just a priest; he was an archbishop, which is a very high level priest. And the archbishops, they have a vow of celibacy. So he broke all his vows. He got married. He started a business. He made money. He had children. So this is after years of being trained as a priest. From his early childhood, he was trained to be a priest. And he grew up and he became an archbishop, which is, a high priest. And then he was inattentive. He fell down and he basically stopped being a priest, started being just a normal person who gets married, has children, gets a job, and so forth. Okay, so what Prabhupada says here is a very important statement. He says that in the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely. But as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. The Prabhupada's examples are very good.
This particular one, everybody can connect with.
Yes, yes. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. That's a very big statement. Misuse of independence means that any moment, due to inattentiveness or carelessness, we can fall down from the position of Krishna consciousness. And it's due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. Yes, it's not that we choose once in our life to be Krishna conscious. Every day we have to reaffirm our determination of being Krishna conscious. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. And this fall down is due to false ego. So there's many examples of priests who have been a priest for many, many years, but actually they've fallen down for a long, long time. And eventually it catches up to them. And they've been a priest for, 20 years or 25 years or 50 years. And then you find out that they have become corrupted by sense gratification. The fall down is due to false ego. So if one is just an ordinary priest, the ordinary priests, they follow the rules and regulations pretty strictly. But when they become a high priest and they get, more benefits, nicer food, nicer living condition, and get a lot of prestige, it's very dangerous for the priest. And they can easily fall down. But they can hide their fallen nature for many, many years and cause havoc by taking advantage of innocent people. So some priests, they decide to take advantage of young boys, thinking that they can groom a young boy and to have sex, and the boy will keep quiet and not say anything. And oftentimes, the boy goes through many years of being molested by this priest. And then he becomes an adult, and at a certain point, he realizes that he's been, inappropriately groomed by the priest, and he eventually gets very upset, angry, and accuses the priest publicly of being a pedophile. And then, all hell breaks out. So now the priest, he makes a decision not to be involved with the woman, but he decides to get involved with a young boy, and he grooms the young boy to become his victim for sense gratification. I mean, it's really horrible, very, very horrible. It happens more than you can imagine. All priests are not corrupt like that, but there are a large number that engage in such abominable activities, all in the name of being a priest. So it happens in Krishna consciousness also, not only the Christians. It's not only the Muslims. Therefore, the main statement here is that everybody, all living entities, in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, has marginal independence. And this allows the person to forget Krishna. Originally, pure consciousness exists. But because of misuse of marginal independence, marginal means it's limited independence. What's it limited to? Well, it's two choices. Either you become Krishna conscious or you don't become Krishna conscious. There is a chance, so misuse of marginal independence, because of misuse of marginal independence, there's a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Yeah, so early on, before I was a devotee, I was living with this archbishop and Christian archbishop, and he was sort of, tutoring me. So, but sometimes he would be invited to marriages. He would perform the marriage, but he would stick around after the marriage ceremony was performed. And then, what usually happens, in the marriage ceremony, everyone is dressed nicely, and the priest is saying different mantras, and they're following these ritual performances, and right in the church, and it's all, looks like it's serious, But then they have the dinner, or they go somewhere for lunch, and then they start dancing and celebrating the marriage, and then someone, brings out some liquor, and of course the lunch or the dinner has meat and so forth, and then there's the celebration. Start, this band, this music, people start dancing. Usually the priest uh, stays to the end of the dinner, and then he goes back. But sometimes they don't do that, and they stick around to see all the nonsense that goes on as far as celebration goes, of a newly married couple. So this can influence the mind of a priest, and very easily the priest can become inattentive about his priestly duties and fold them. I've seen this happen several times. So that's why it's saying here that the living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but his marginal independence. But he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, meaning it's limited independence, there's a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. So let's say we are a devotee. Well, as a devotee, we have to be very careful what we do and who we associate with and how we perceive our position as a devotee. So just with even a little bit of inattentiveness, we can fall down. Just even a little bit of inattentiveness, not being regulated, we can fall down. So therefore, it says that it's just like one shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. Very big statement, misuse of independence. So, when young boys are being trained to become priests, they're living usually a very strict life. Once they do become priests and then they get elevated to archbishop or something, then they have their own car, they have their own house, they have this and that. They have to be very careful. As a boy that was being trained to become a priest, they were very, let's say, living a very strict life of tapasya. But once they became a full-fledged priest, they can have their own house, they can have their own car, they have their own money, and it's very dangerous for them. They can easily fall down by being inattentive and not strictly following all the rules and regulations. Same thing happens to devotees. So, therefore, that inattentiveness is the beginning of fall down when we don't pay attention to all the principles that we have to follow in Krishna consciousness. And it's like shaving your face, your cheek with a sharp razor. But as soon as there's inattention by which one is diverted from carefully shaving, one can cut his cheek because he mishandles the razor. That's a nice example. The Prabhupada says, not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Like, for example, whether one is a brahmachari, or even someone who's married, one should never be alone with a woman. Uh, there was an example of this. Bhakti Saraswati Thakur was preaching once, and one young lady came and she asked Bhakti Saraswati Thakur to come with her to a private room where she could speak to him privately, and he refused. He said, whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of me and everybody else. I'm not going to go in some private room and talk to you. So this is a principle that we should follow, whether we're a sannyasi or just a regular devotee. We should never be alone with a woman. Because when you put yourself in that position, you end up in he said, she said.
Mm.
And she said usually wins the contest.
Mm.
So you should never be caught alone with a woman in some private place. Sometimes, ladies ask me, they say, oh, I want to speak to you privately. Can we just go to this room? And I say, no, I don't speak privately to anyone. You can, whatever you have to say it, in the company of all these other people. Because as soon as you start giving, uh, acquiescing or surrendering to this private, instruction, is very dangerous. And one should never be alone with a woman. That doesn't mean we hate women. It just means that whenever fire comes close to butter, what happens? The butter melts, right? So why put yourself in a position like that? Therefore, we have to be very careful, especially when someone asks us to have some private instruction. There's no such thing as private instruction for uh, either it's a priest or it's a devotee. One should never be alone with a woman if one wants to have a clean spiritual life. There's nothing wrong with women, but there is this possibility of fire and butter. So therefore, we should just be very careful about our association with women. Never be in a one-to-one situation, because ultimately it's a she said, he said situation, and you can never win the argument if you put yourself in that situation. Everyone will become suspicious of a person's or a man's motives. If a woman says, "Well, he touched me," I asked him for some advice, and then he put his hand on my breast or something like that, and so that's it. You can never win the argument, because you accepted to be in a position of he said, she said. So you have to always be in the company of several people, never be alone with a woman. That's a big, big mistake if you want to have a spiritual life. Okay. So, Prabhupada says, not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. So if you like to be alone with a woman to give some special instruction, that is misuse of independence. Yeah, there was this one devotee. He was very good, chanting and playing the mridanga, and going on Sankirtan. So one day we were on Sankirtan, and after the Sankirtan, we all came back to the temple, and he was missing, and we didn't know where he was. And one day later, he came back, and I asked him. I said, "What happened to you?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well," I said, "You disappeared. Well, what were you doing? Where were you?" "Oh, I was preaching." "Oh, you were preaching. Were you preaching to a man or to a woman?" He said, "Well, I was preaching to a woman." So, he fell down. He just met some woman while he was distributing books, and I don't know, he got attracted to her, and then one thing led to another, and then he didn't come back, uh, to the temple, and he came back, a day or two later, and he said, "I was preaching." So, and then what happened? We find out later on that he got this girl pregnant. And the tragedy is that the child that was born, as a little boy, was born with severe type of deformity. And now he is a father, although he didn't marry that lady, he was a father of a little boy who was born deformed and suffered his whole life. I mean, it's terrible, terrible, terrible thing. So we should never deviate from strictly following all the principles of Krishna consciousness. And one of the principles that is not spoken of enough is that a man, whether he's a brahmachari or he's a grihastha, should never be alone with a woman. It's a very bad thing to do if you want to have a spiritual life, because it's very easy to fall down. Okay, so that's why it says not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. The fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. These are major statements here. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there's always a chance that this will happen. And therefore, one has to be very careful. False ego is a basic principle of all material activities, which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from this material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. Okay, so are there any questions or comments about this verse? I'm going to read the verse real quickly. It says, the material ego springs from the Mahatattva. And the Mahatattva is referring to the sum total of the material nature, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind the senses of perception, and the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. That this is a very, let's say, significant verse. It shows the genesis of the consciousness of a living entity. That's why it says in the purport, in the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or the identification of the body as self. Well, that happens very quickly in the life of a child. As soon as the relatives start cuddling the child develops false ego, you know, and then in a subtle way, the child begins to identify with the family, identify with the food they eat, identify with the conversations that they have, you know, so they become a member of the family, and that means that they have all these different, let's say, obligations that are mundane, and they might never realize what's happened to them unless they come in contact with a pure devotee. So what was Prabhupada doing when he preached? He would help us understand the situation of Maya and how we were actually under the control of Maya, even though we think that we're in control of our own life, but actually we're under the control of Maya. And it's very subtle. Sometimes it can be very gross, but sometimes it's also very, very subtle. And it cannot be understood without the help of a bona fide spiritual master. And what does a bona fide spiritual master do? It can chastise the devotee. Whenever you're chastised by a bona fide spiritual master, you should understand that he has given you special mercy because he's pointing out your foibles, your shortcomings, your mistakes. That's what a guru does. He points out all the mistakes that we make. So we shouldn't be upset by that. We should be happy because otherwise we could go through our whole life making the same mistake over and over again. Okay. Are there any questions or comments?
The Lord, so it's basically our misuse of independence, and then the Lord, because he impregnates the material world with the living entities. So does that mean like the moment we say we misuse the independence, the Lord then puts us into this material world, and that's when the false ego basically we're kind of overwhelmed or wrapped with the false ego, and that means like even the living entity, not only after coming out of the womb, it's the fact that it's even in the womb means that it is in false ego. I mean, by then it is misused. And then obviously the more interactions in this society, will only amplify that false ego.
Well, in the beginning, we always, in pure Krishna consciousness.
Correct.
But when we come in, in contact with the people, like parents and relatives and friends and teachers and this and that, it says here, originally pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there's a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. Yeah, now the example of this is when your kid first goes to school, your kid has the baseball hat on, let's say, with the visor facing forward like that. But after some time, your kid comes home and the hat is turned backwards and the visor is in the back, right? And then as time goes on, the uh, the hat is turned so that the visor is on, let's say, the right hand side of your head. Then later on, the visor is still on the right hand side of your head, but now you pushed it up so that it's tilted and almost falling down. Same way. Also, your pants are pulled down to like the middle of your butt, and it looks like they're going to fall down. And you're walking down the street like that. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
So the different positions of the baseball hat on the head is different self-identifications of the person. It starts, normally like this, and then it goes like this, with the visor in the back, right? And then it goes on the side, and then it comes tipped up, so it looks like it's going to fall off almost, right? So each one of the positions of the hat are different identifications of the person. So what you can say is that every child that's growing up is trying to figure out who they are, and the position of the hat indicates who they're trying to be.
Mm.
And this is due to bad association. Okay, so, and we see this all the time. Like, for example, some kids, they come to school completely dressed in black with army, what do you call it? The army shoes and the different types of buttons and things like that, and tattoos and so forth. Whereas, maybe a few years before, they just looked like a normal child. And then because of the association they had, they become uh, they identify with different types of clothing, tattoos, and uh, the way they talk, the way they walk, and so forth. So their culture has changed. So there are many different cultures, and the child has to identify itself by associating with different kinds of people. And they finally decide who they want to be by that association. So parents have to protect their children from bad association. Otherwise, very easily a child can be misled, and all of a sudden one day the child comes home dressed like a punk rocker and says hello to the father and mother and says, "Hi, dude," and points. They make this movement with their hands, and they go like that. And anyway, the whole thing is crazy, but it's all about self-identification. especially when one becomes a teenager. They have to they want to identify who they are, and it depends on how they dress, how they talk, what they eat, and all these things are important to see how the child is identifying himself or herself. So sometimes, you go to high school and you see some kids completely dressed in black with army, what do you call it, shoes and tattoos, and this and that, and you just look, puzzled. How did this kid learn this? Well, it was through association. That means by the inattentiveness of the parents and the bad association that the kid has fallen into. Now, the child, you can't recognize your own child anymore. It can happen very easily in the society today because of uh, inattentiveness of the parents and putting the kids in, you put your kid in high school, and there might be, 1,000 kids in the high school. Not all of them, most of them are not Krishna conscious, but your child comes in contact with all of them. And it's very dangerous because there are so many different, let's say, cultures that are represented in a high school. And eventually the child will want to identify with one of those different cultures. And all of a sudden, you don't recognize your child anymore because the child became contaminated by these other kids. Okay.
So there is a question online.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ramakit.
Yes, Maharaj. So there are some people who are disciplined, yogic, they are not fallen, they don't have false ego. So they think why they need Krishna consciousness. Can you let me know why?
Well, you know yogis who are not Krishna conscious?
Yeah.
Okay. So then they're not yogis, they're bogies. A real yogi has to be Krishna conscious. Yoga, what does that mean? It means that you are you're engaging in Krishna conscious activities. That's the whole purpose of yoga. Yoga means to come to Krishna.
Yeah, Krishna himself says, right? Yoginam api sarvesham madgatena karana siddhavan bhajate samayuktatmo.
Yeah, so you can't be a yogi and not be Krishna conscious. Yoga means actually being Krishna conscious and following the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. So when a person deviates from that, they're no longer a yogi, they're a bogi. So they might be dressed like a yogi, but their actions are not in sync with what genuine yogis do. I had a friend of mine, and he insisted that I come and meet this Muslim saint. And I said, well, I'm not really a Muslim saint. He said, no, you have to come. He's a very, very special person. So, out of respect for my friend, I went. And he was a Muslim, but he practiced, tapasya and so forth. And he gave a lecture, just like, devotee saints give lectures, right? After the lecture, one of his disciples came up with a plate, and in the plate was a cigarette and a coffee. So after the lecture, the yogi took a couple puffs of the cigarette, and then he drank some sips of the coffee. And afterwards, when he finished his class and everything, he walked straight toward me. I didn't make any, special, movements toward him so that he could recognize me or anything. But for some reason, once he got off his asana, he walked straight toward me, and he stopped right in front of me. And I didn't know what he was going to do. And he put his hand on my bead bag and sort of played with the bead bag, and he said, "This is not good." So I didn't say anything, And after, it was a little bit stressful, right? Because there were a lot of people there. And he for some reason or other, because I dressed as a devotee, right? He got off his Vyasa after he had taken a couple puffs of his cigarette and drank his coffee and everything. And his class was over. And he walked straight toward me. I didn't ask him any questions, but he recognized that I was some kind of devotee, right? Or ISKCON. And he put his hand on my bead bag and sort of, played with it a little bit. And he said, "This is not good." And then he, walked away. Then all his disciples came up to me and said, "Oh, Guru Dev gave you his special mercy." I didn't say anything, but they were all an illusion. They thought I got the special mercy of Guru Dev. Uh, so he was a Muslim, what you would call it, uh, so-called Mahant, great so-called devotee. And he was, he had bad habits, but he had a lot of following, And one friend of mine, wasn't a devotee, but was a friend of mine, he basically, insisted that I go and see him. So out of respect for my friend, I said, okay. So we went. And out of nowhere, after his lecture, he comes straight up to me. And there were a lot of people in his lecture. He ignored everyone else. He walked directly to me and played around, put his hand on my bead bag and played around with it and said, "This is not good." And then
So was he preaching Islam thing, or was it he has his own philosophy?
He's a Muslim, but he was, preaching something. I didn't know what. I couldn't figure out what he was preaching. And but the fact that he walked straight to me, I mean, there were a lot of people in his lecture, right? But after the lecture, he walks directly to me, right? So you could tell I was probably from ISKCON and dressed like, a devotee, everything. And I played around with my bead bag, and he said, "This is not good." And then he walked away. And then all his disciples came up. "Guru Dev gave you his special mercy. It didn't look like mercy to me. It looked like he was making fun of my bead bag. And this is going on all over the place. We are sort of uh, protected by this because we're associating with devotees all the time. But there are all these bogus yogis, and they have a lot of following. And they're teaching them all kinds of things. They're under a spell of Maya, and they can't see that this is a completely bogus person. And to try and convince them that the so-called yogi is a bogus person, it's almost impossible. Not completely, but almost. Because they're under his, let's say, spell of Maya. Okay, so thank you very much. I think we'll stop there. Not talk about bogus yogis anymore.
So again, today's Thanksgiving Day, so we'll be at the temple.
Yeah, I'm going to be cooking lasagna. When the kids come, to get prasadam, they say, "I don't want anything else. Just give me a lasagna." Then they'll come back for seconds and sometimes thirds.
Yeah, yeah. And our lasagna comes out really good. So
Yeah, it is good.
Kids really like the cheese part.
Yeah. They don't want anything else. Don't put any rice, just give me the lasagna. Okay, so we'll have fun today with lasagna,
yeah, and then
chanting.
it's been advertised Thanksgiving dinner. So lots of people will
A
come.
lot of people. I was always surprised, like, on Thanksgiving Day, usually people stay at home with their family, right? But not the Hindus.
Yeah,
Hindus come to the temple. They bring the whole family also.
yeah, they're doing the right thing. They're
Yeah.
coming to the real family.
So Thanksgiving is not a Hindu celebration, right? It's not a Hindu.
So we never had that growing up. Now, of course, there's some Western
Yeah.
culture a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
But I don't think Thanksgiving is celebrated.
Well, we give thanks to Radha and Krishna. But they come for the Thanksgiving dinner, I mean, big time. Even, years ago, even like, I was always surprised, like 600, 700, 800 people would come for the Thanksgiving dinner. And somehow or other, they figured out it's special, And it was because there's a lot of lasagna, honey bowl.
People get excited, Maharaj, with so much preparation
Yeah.
of the feast.
Well, it takes, hours and hours to make a large amount of lasagna because you have to bake it. And now we have more ovens, so it's easier. Before we only had one oven.
Right.
So the baking time could be like,
Yeah,
6
it
hours.
used to be the one that long pole.
Yeah.
Because we had to do between. There's also
We were handed to people to take it to home,
homes and
put it in
bake
their
it.
oven, and then bring it back. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll end the session for now. We'll see you today at the temple. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.